Sending good vibes to you.
All right. Well, let's get the
Welcome.
stream together set up real quick then.
Yeah. Welcome in, everybody. Let me give a shout out to Angie. Not hearing audio at all. Oh, okay. Thanks, Lynn. Well, okay. Oh, well, I should probably have my mic unmuted. That would definitely be helpful.
It might. But it's totally your choice.
Yeah. Welcome in, everybody. Please let me know if you can hear all of us on stream right now. If not, we can keep adjusting. But welcome in, Raiders, and hi, folks on the raid train. Hello, hello. We're just gonna give it a few minutes. We're gonna start a stream together and everything to get us going for today's very special, spot in the raid train. So yeah.
We are building this plane in the air. But we've got a really cool panel lined up. Excited to have everyone here to discuss urban resilience and sustainability. Happy Earth Day.
Mm-hmm.
Yay, happy Earth Day.
Wednesday, April 22nd, 2026. The big year 26. We're going to get
when was the first Earth Day? I'm going to look that up.
It's a good question.
Oh, good question.
I actually don't know.
1970.
Ooh.
Okay.
Taking
So
it back.
over 50 years of Earth Day. That's great.
Nice.
And this is Seed's third year. I might as well, I guess, take a minute to explain what it is while everyone's doing their final setup stuff. So Seed is streamers engaged on Earth Day. And it was just an idea I had a couple of years ago, wanting to encourage my fellow streamers to focus their content on ecological, environmental themes for or around Earth Day. And here we are, year 3. We've got 2 raid trains. We've got a panel. We've got a team fundraiser, but then other folks are also fundraising for their own causes. It's very open-ended. Seed. Anyone can be a seed any way that they feel called to do so. So, yeah, that's Seed in a nutshell.
Okay, folks are saying on my end they can't hear everybody. Oh no.
Uh-oh.
I apologize.
On everybody's video source, did you check the box use OBS to do audio? Because that's what I had to do also.
Yes.
Okay.
So if you click on our browser source, go in the options, scroll down, and you'll see use OBS as audio. And that should fix it.
Okay, and while you're all doing that, you should also see in your browsers that you have an invite for Stream Together.
Should pop up any second.
In our browsers.
Yes, so that'll appear in your browser when you're on Twitch, just up by the top, like where you have you received a gift sub, that notification. That's where your Stream Together collaboration notifications will pop up. It's a little confusing since they're not in the normal like dashboard experience.
Yeah. And I think folks are saying they can hear everybody now. So thank you for the control the OBS.
Yeah, that's what was, I had to do the same thing. So.
Okay.
I'm
and you might get duplicated when we see Stream Together. You're not seeing it yet, or you don't have it yet?
I don't have it yet.
Okay.
I can try to invite you again. You need to open Twitch in your browser. It'll need to be Chrome or Firefox to work. And then just when you're on Twitch, like your Twitch homepage, up near where your picture is in the top right corner, there's, let me actually open it so I can tell you the correct look. It is the little one that looks like it's oh my gosh, like an old school desk inbox. You'll see a note there or should see an alert there, and it'll say that Violacious wants to collaborate or something like that.
It's under notifications, right?
Yes.
I'm not seeing a notification. Are
Okay,
you
let
sending
me
it to TransX Bombshell, or are you sending it to the new Jamie Delphine?
I sent it to the new one.
I hope my rebrand's not messing up my back end.
I just added you to favorites. I don't think I can see the old name anymore. No, I can't.
Yeah, I usually switched
It
over.
says that I invited you, and here, I'm gonna cheat. And I'm gonna send you a link in Discord.
Okay. Yeah, those tend to work.
Yeah.
Because I did this a little while ago, but it was before I did the whole switch up. Here. Join session, yay. Okay.
Yay.
Everybody,
Fantastic. We're
thank
all
you for your
here.
patience.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and hit start sharing chat. So we'll see all of our friends together now.
Is it a party? It's officially a party.
It's officially a party now. It is
Woo,
begun.
birthday
We're
party.
here.
There we go.
Nice.
On my side, congrats Kale and Allie for jumping up on the early crew podium before it disappears.
All right. We're a little behind. It is 10:15 Pacific time, just to do a bit of a time check. I just want to say thank you to everyone for your patience as we got everything ironed out. I am Jamie Delphine. We are joining today for Seed 3, which is Streamers Engaging Earth Day. I'll be hosting the panel and participating a little bit. And we're bringing together here some wonderful people, including Ruthful LA, who is the wonderful organizer of the event, who brought this panel together. We're also joined by C, who's a wonderful organizer and VTuber. And we also have Violacious, who is joining us as not just a panelist, but also our tech support. So everyone, please give a huge round of applause to Violacious as well.
The tech mentor added to all the panels for ulterior motives, but glad to be here.
So just to sort of frame the space, today we're going to be talking, as we are streamers, we're going to be bringing to you the topic of urban resilience and cooperative sustainability. We also want to try to bring a little bit about how marginalized identities shape advocacy, and we're really excited to bring those to the table here today. If anybody wants to add anything, I know that we have some wonderful perspectives, and I have a lot to add myself to these. I'll go ahead and kick it off if introductions are good, and I'll just have to ask, when we hear sustainability, the narrative often focuses on the individual choices. How do you view sustainability through collective action? And we'll just big open-ended question to kick it off. Anybody that wants to jump in?
Yeah,
I'll tee it to Ruth if it's not going anywhere.
Yeah, well, I was gonna say, so when I think of the phrase cooperative sustainability, one of the things that actually comes to mind for me is knowing that we need to move away from this notion of, oh, it's all on me. If I just recycle a little bit better, and if I just use a metal straw, then it will all get fixed. And while individual actions are important, this notion of it's all on the consumer versus on some of the corporations, or not some, all of the corporations who are contributing to the problem. Another thing that comes to mind is California a few years ago actually filed a lawsuit against big oil / big plastic because they lied to us for so many decades about recycling and the ability to recycle plastic. So they made it seem like, oh, we're just not doing enough as consumers. And that's why we have this plastic, swarm in the Pacific Ocean, when in reality it has to do with these companies continuing to create a product and sell us this product that is not recyclable. So yeah, I think that's where my brain goes as soon as I hear about that kind of collective sustainability of we need to be pushing the companies that are producing on a large scale to fix their practices.
I appreciate that insight, and it's one of those things I think about a lot because does the consumer having a single straw make a big difference, or does us putting a can into the recycle bin make that all big much of a difference? Especially if they're going, oh well, it's expensive to use that, so we're going to still use the cheap, stuff that we rip out of the earth instead. Uh, on on that, like that pushes more towards us as a community driving action to get these big corporations to change their behaviors to produce better products basically. One of the things that I was kind of talking about with some friends a few years back was, why do we have so much packaging that is multiple materials? Like it's paper and plastic. So is there any functional reason? No. Why do we have Mylar bags for potato chips that have to go in the trash and can't be recycled under any means? Like at this point in time, we know about this, and those are still the products we're getting. But like, what can we do to push back and be like, no, Lay's, like, why are you still in this package when there's 10 other recyclable or compostable options that your product could ship in and come to our homes just fine? And what's it going to cost? 1 to 2 pennies per unit? Like, we can absorb that. That's fine. Let's get on it.
Yeah, and honestly, I want to go back to something that Ruthful said because I completely agree with what you're both saying, but I really love the framing. You said big oil and big plastic. And I honestly don't think I've heard it framed that way before. I think that's incredibly important for us to realize that is the same industry. We definitely have like a lot of materials that are being produced that I think the correct framing would be can be recycled but are not, because there's a lot of packaging materials that will have symbols on it that you can in theory recycle, but most of our local recycling companies just simply don't have the machines to do so. So knowing all of that and knowing that we have like this big giant like industry wide like monster that we're sort of facing, what are some like collective actions that each of you think we could suggest that could be taking? um, what is what is the way that we can take this to scale in your opinion? Anybody have a big mission? Because I will always take it to decommodifying the land. 100% for me, and trying to get collective action for me is always trying to get us towards, you know, collectivization in the sense of we need to get land and housing out of the commodified markets. We need to be working in like, you know, tangible ways that are like land trust movements. I'm all about the 3 P's of housing: production, preservation, protection. But I also know that a lot of us, being streamers, being people that work from home, um, we probably also have another lens as to where we're looking at like what it looks like to commute and how we can have a low impact, sustainable way of living that involves like a, you know, a walkable neighborhood. And I'm sure we all have a take on that, but to each of us, like what are some collective actions? What excites you about possible ways to push back against this big pollution plastic and oil industry that we're faced against?
Uh, I can take a share some thoughts here in regards to the question, because I think one thing I've been thinking about a lot is mutualism. Um, I think. Oh, am I talking? Oh, Gia, can you not hear me? Can folks hear me? Okay.
Is there an audio
Oh, okay,
issue?
perfect. Gotcha. Um, I think to me, one thing I often think about, because we have so much technology. Oh, you can't hear me on my stream. Did I mute myself again?
Oh
uh,
no.
I hope I didn't. Let me see. Oh, uh, give me 1 second. Maybe my mic's just not picking up. Okay, I should be here. I think I can hear myself now. Thank you for that, Gia.
That was such a good
But
catch and very helpful. Thank you for pointing that out.
yeah. Um, so one thing I often think about when it comes to like environmental justice and some of these topics, and it kind of relates to what people are talking about a lot, which is generative AI and artificial intelligence. And I want to caveat this by saying I'm not a component of generative AI, and I still like animatronics and technology as a useful tool for people because I'm a scientist. So oftentimes, like I always say, tools of science can be helpful for the people. I think the fact that like we have the ability to create like very much networks where folks can learn how to code and create their own technology to use with their friends is very cool. There's so many ways to code programs and services online now. But one thing I often think about is how to scale that in a way where one, folks who are the most multiply marginalized can use that technology in terms of surveillance, because there's a lot of ways in which our data is no longer like private for ourselves with digital IDs and such. But I think about mutualism in the sense of how we can think about what technology we use and actually refurbishing a lot of the technology we already own instead of buying things that are completely new, if that makes sense. Because one thing I think about is like the fact that people are buying like retro consoles, for example. Like they're trying to take like old technology and either refurbish it or actually add like Wi-Fi and stuff to it so that way it works.
I've seen this.
Or
People are making like cyber decks.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's like cyber feminism and stuff like that too. And I think that's a good way to approach it, especially for folks in the streaming and tech space, where like if you have like an old you know,
Thank you,
like an old
Twitch.
computer or hello Twitch, thank you for the donation. That's awesome. But if you have like old technology or can make your own cyber deck and or you can even can talk to folks who know how to make those things, it's actually not as challenging. It's about accessibility and some resourcing and recycled like products and tools. I think that can be a good way to start to one protect our privacy, but also encourage folks to learn and to be able to practice mutualism in terms of like bartering and mutual exchange and also mutual aid and that type of thing. So I hope that answers the question, but that's kind of something I've been thinking about a
It
lot of
does.
owning things. And
Just
like,
for one
yeah,
second, I just
yeah.
want to pause and just say welcome in Raiders. Thank you
Hmm.
so much,
Yes.
Nolani Proctor, for raiding in with
Yes.
14.
Welcome in.
But yeah,
Hi, everybody.
I think that absolutely does answer the question and addresses sort of collectivism. And to touch on that further, I mean, the cyber deck movement and what we're seeing people do with retro technology, I think is the right direction because we are seeing, I know AI is a very disruptive force in the world right now, especially with technology and
Hmm.
conservation, and when it comes to ecological impact and the socioeconomic impact it has, and where they're trying to place it into communities, that typically are targeted in environmental sort of terrorism. I like to use that word, but some
Hmm.
people may not feel that as passionate. But I do feel like, we are also seeing the technology sort of become more sustainable because just that is its own very own nature is technology at launch is usually not the best iteration of the technology, and it refines itself and it gets better, and we are seeing AI use less and less energy, but on the other side of that we're seeing it need less and less resources. And so
Hmm.
to talk on to your point, you can now take some AI models and put it on an old laptop or put it on an old computer. And you don't need to be running like the Chat GPT or the Claude or what Anthropic's putting out or the Open AI is putting out. And you can actually run smaller models on much more energy efficient, if you want to use them for coding, if you want to use them for these things, and you don't need to be using the main services. You could just download your own and put it on an older hardware that is sustainable, that isn't using the amount of resources. So I am seeing those same things, and it's weird to see that there's, as you're saying, there's like collectivism and to use the old technology, but we're also seeing um, the technology itself is making itself more sustainable, even though, you know, we don't want to use generative AI, period, because we don't want to put artists out of work. It could
Mhm.
possibly have some uses for, like, I don't know, medicine, or I don't know, governance and running utilities. Like, I don't know, your power company could probably find ways to use it so that we're using things more sustainably, possibly. But I don't know. I'm not like a computer programmer. That's certainly not my my forte. But I hear what you're saying, and I'm excited about. We're now going into a space where it might not necessarily be completely evil. There might be some applications that could be considered worthwhile. I know that, like, they're using it to identify cancer. So I've seen some applications of the new emerging technologies that give me hope. Because I mean, it is really easy to go into like that sense of like doomerism and like a state of like climate doom. But I think Ruthful, I think you yourself have framed despair as sort of a luxury or privilege. I think that's
Mm.
something that you've stated. Can you unpack what that means for us and how we can use small wins to sustain our momentum in the fight against these technologies and the oil and plastic industry?
Yes, definitely. So I can't take credit for the notion. I got it myself from Rebecca Solnit, who is an author who's written a lot of great books and who also amplifies a lot of voices of people who are being directly impacted by climate change. And the idea basically comes from the people who are most impacted by any issue rarely get to just throw up their hands and say, "Oh, this is awful, but the fight is over, so I guess we're just gonna accept what's coming." No, the people who are impacted by an issue are going to try and do something about it. And it's the people who are removed from that issue who can say, "Oh, no one's working on this. We're doomed." And that's true whether we're talking about climate change. That's true whether we're talking about racism or ableism or any sort of ism. If you are in a position to just say, well, we're doomed, there's nothing to be done about it, you are probably one of the most removed from the impacts. And so it feels like a privilege to be able to say that. Whereas the people who are losing their homes, who are losing their livelihoods or their lives or their health to the effects of climate change, they don't have that option. They have to do something, anything. And I do think it's very important, as you brought up, to celebrate the wins. So the antidote to despair is hope, but not like a passive hope. It has to be a hope that drives action. And one of Rebecca Solnit's quotes that she has that I absolutely love is that hope is not a lottery ticket that you sit on your couch clutching. It is the axe that you use to break down a door in an emergency. Because you think you can do something, you do something. And so I do think that it's really important to see, for example, all of the advances that have been made when it comes to renewable technologies. California is getting so much of its power from renewables at this point. And, you know, that's true across the world. Europe is also on track to be doing really good in that area. So even though the US as a whole is backsliding, there are wins, there is momentum, there is progress. And when we take the time to say, yay, good job, team, for those things, it then fuels us for the next thing. Yeah. Oh, I wish I had a nodding emote. I'm with you, Gia.
I just
We need to get one of those.
supplied what I think the snap
There you
implies
go.
about the
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
welcome. Yeah, that's incredibly powerful, and I think, you know, as we head towards these renewable energies and the fact that we are using more and more renewable energy as, you know, the source of our energy grid overall, I think that the consumption element becomes less and less, insidious. But we're not quite there yet. And just knowing that, and knowing that we do have to have all those small wins. I guess when we look at who's forced into, like, who's displaced and whose housing becomes commodified, it's never equal. And I guess I'd direct this one at C. C, what do you think when it comes to like intersectionality, like our specific marginalized identities, and how they change the way that we should approach community organizing and environmental justice?
Yeah, I appreciate this question a lot. And as I always tell folks, like I studied intersectionality, and as somebody before I became a scientist fully, I've worked with a lot of organizations and groups in regards to different intersectional issues. And I think the most important thing I like to remember is that people's social positionality, their race, gender, sexuality, and where they come from in terms of their perspectives is also going to shape the way in which the world imposes its worldviews onto them and vice versa. So, one thing I like to think about when it comes to going back to, again, the insidiousness of like harmful artificial intelligence. Like, I'm a Southerner, like, I grew up in the American South, or
I grew
as,
up in
as
Georgia.
Turtle Island, or Creek Muskogee land, essentially. And so a lot of the conversations when people talk about pollution, people are a little still distal from. So they're like, oh, I didn't know it was poisoning the water and like the air. But then my brain's like, well, I'm a Southerner and this is hitting a lot of like, you know, areas that don't have a lot of resources, as well as since I am like a public health person by training and such, and a health educator, I often like to tell people like, well, how would you feel if you had these data centers around you that were making your air more dangerous? Like you had more like carbon monoxide in the air, or the roads and the potholes in your area you can't deal with, but then there's like a data center that's making your water more gross. And I think about that when it comes to like crises we still haven't dealt with too, in that same way, like Flint, Michigan, where it's predominantly a lot of Black and multi marginalized people. So I think when it comes to intersectionality, it's a good perspective to keep in mind of like who's in the room to be able to help make these decisions. Because I'll never forget some of the conversations I've had being a scientist and being around technology, where oftentimes people who look like me are not in those spaces. But also, people who are the most marginalized are also the most aware, who still cannot necessarily move the needle in the way that someone who might be a CEO in a room could, snap their fingers if something changes. So it's not in a savior complex type of way that I'm thinking through this. It's more of just a way of saying that, like, a lot of these issues around climate change, as we've talked about, marginalized communities are already thinking about because it's their lived day-to-day experience. Like, again, as a Southerner, like, I don't have the luxury not to think about racism because it happens in the South, and that's the thing. It's something you're not like, you're keeping in the back of your mind essentially. But you're also keeping a bit of radical hope in the sense of like, I've seen people in the South and people who are pushing back against data centers and pollution and environmental change in a way where they're not only giving exemplars of what folks could do in their local environments, but they're also really being able to push that beyond in a global sense too. Because I think it's like what people say, think local but move globally type of energy. So that's something that I definitely appreciate per this conversation around intersectionality, because it's something that is both an embodiment, but also for folks who have privileges at different intersections, something to think about when it comes to, again, technology, science, and pollution, where some of us have to think about this. This is not a like theoretical like reality. It's not a video game. It's not distal. It's my lived experience in the South with data centers popping up everywhere and people not having access to resources. So I hope that makes sense. But yeah, that's kind of how I think
Completely.
about it all the time.
Yeah,
So
no,
yeah.
completely. And that's right on the money. And I guess I'll kick it right back to you. Because when we talk about urban greening or eco-friendly living, like the mainstream narrative excludes the people living in the spaces, like you said. So how do we ensure that, like, that we're building a sustainable, like, green city that doesn't just become another tool for like gentrification and displacement?
I think it goes back to community engagement a lot, honestly. And I think just if you're in a certain location, being mindful of the historical and social political context in which you're there. And what I mean is that I think a big driver of gentrification and a lot of these issues are historical. Like I think about redlining, for example, which if folks don't know what that is, where like historically neighborhoods have been shaped a particular way in terms of roads and like cars and public transportation. There's like a real historical context as to why certain neighborhoods and areas look the way they do.
Mhm.
But I really think when it comes to this question, something that I'm often really encouraging folks to do when it terms to greenery is thinking about some of the ways in which communities and certain cultures have traditions that are talking about environmental sustainability. They're really talking about ways in which to preserve land, to think about how to, again, going back to mutualism, how to move past these systems that encourage very much late stage capitalism, but more so are asking people to think through what's another way we can operate in the world that not only like is life affirming for people, but also for animals in the environment that we live in too. Because I just don't want it to center around humans. It should be around like animals and plants and things like that as well. So I encourage that conversation as well as also thinking through where we can create, like I said, life affirming systems through like plants and gardening and really also like cooperatives where people own a part of the puzzle, whether it's like a co-op in your local neighborhood or even again going back to like gardening, like sharing land with people if it's possible, or sharing like space with people in terms of what we can do together. I think in the tech space, people often thinking about like shared office spaces or like even remote opportunities so folks can gather together in a safe way to think about like, you know, driving into and from work. Can you work from home? Can you create those options in your space? But just a lot of the ways in which we can survive and thrive together with the land that we're occupying, but also engaging with communities who have been there if we are somebody who's moved to a new location, and thinking about the fact that a lot more communities, given climate change, could also be more and more, I don't want to use the term like nomadic, but could be moving a lot more. So thinking about how to create safe spaces and environments for folks to be able to move across different planes of space. I know that sounds very like heady, but that's just kind of how I think about it as somebody who's also into Afrofuturism and thinking about just how our world is shifting so much. And that while I'm not a doomer, I'm not into doomerism or nihilism when it comes to climate change, as a scientist, I think about the fact that like, you know, things are getting hotter and some areas may not be sustainable for people to live with animals and community. So what does that look like if people are going to be moving around a lot more? And what are those life affirming institutions or structures that we can create so that people can move, get access to clean water, housing, food, and just honestly, data sovereignty is a big thing on my mind if it isn't obvious too, where people can control information or have the right to information, but still be in community with land and people and animals. So again, I hope that answers the question, but that's something I really encourage through resources, books, and there's a lot of recommendations I have from Indigenous scientists as well as Black scientists too, who think about this a lot as well in terms of what institutions we already have in community centers, but also what we can create right now too, because there is so much technology and accessibility and resources that are free for people to use both in their local libraries, but also online as well. So yeah.
Wonderful. No, and that touches a lot on what I was just talking about, like localizing your data, to hopefully not just minimize actually, not just minimize your like power usage, but also your data footprint. Like it becomes like sort of like a double-edged sword that like the more data we put out there, the more services that we consume, the more energy that we consume. Something's got to go and churn through that data. Something's got to review that in order for it to be useful. And there's just more and more data. So that is definitely something for us to be cognizant of. And sort of on that path, as we start to think about, because like many of us live in like concrete jungles. A lot of us are in like really urban spaces. I know I've been for the last 4 years managing a cooperative in Los Angeles. It's one of the longest running cooperative spaces. It's actually on what's known as a land trust, which is a very large collective movement to decommodify the land. So everything that's being mentioned here is absolutely on the vein of my passions, and I'm very glad to be hosting and participating in this panel. But I also know that Ruthful has been in LA hanging out and knows a lot about the greening spaces and sort of a lot more of the like on the ground, because when we think about like solutions, we do think about a lot of like top down solutions, but the real power is at the grassroots level.
Hmm.
So what's going on the grassroots on the street level, Ruthful? What can you share with us
So,
as the efforts to introduce green space to these urban spaces?
yeah, so I mean, I do find, it's funny, it's a joke in LA that we don't have seasons, right? And to anyone who makes that joke, I say, well, have you been to your local park? Because they're subtle, but they're there. You know when things are blooming, you know when leaves are falling, like it does happen. It's just not as dramatic as say in New England. But there are, so when I participated in an event that the Twitch Women's Guild and the Unity Guilds did, not this past December but December 2024, we went and volunteered at a local community garden just north of downtown LA. And when we were there, we learned that there are 41 of these community gardens spread across LA within the official community garden network, but then there's a ton other. But if you find a local garden like that near you, oftentimes you can pay a small membership fee to get a plot where you can grow your own food or your own flowers. They also have volunteer hours where you can show up and work together to beautify the space. So it's a really neat resource. And I do feel like a lot of cities have this. I mean, I wouldn't go so far as to say that, for example, New York City might not have the square footage for a lot of that, but there are some. I have seen videos of people having rooftop gardens. Folks are out there being creative, using whatever space and whatever resources they have. And if you can find those people, you can support them. Everyone is always down for volunteers. Okay. Whether it's turning the compost or whether it's helping to build a planter, like you can show up, you can come hang out. I saw someone said in the chat about community fridges in Poland, and actually, there are a lot of those in LA as well. So I have to assume they're in a lot of the larger cities around the US and around the world, where folks, this really taps into mutual aid, where folks are realizing, hey, I have extra resources in this area. If I put them in a place where my neighbors can access them, now we are working together to strengthen our community, and we're also minimizing our waste footprints. So big fan of that for sure.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm familiar with the community fridges.
Mm.
A lot of them are tied into a lot of the local outreach groups. If folks aren't familiar with the organizations here in Los Angeles, like the one that I always refer to is it's known as K Town for All.
Hmm.
That one is a wonderful organization that will distribute food and sort of like hygiene products. They make like hygiene kits to pass out to the unhoused. And a lot of those efforts are sort of paired with like another organization I'm familiar with called Water Drop LA that will distribute water and pallets of water. And so there's a lot of communal and collective efforts, especially here in Los Angeles, that I'm familiar of that work in tandem with and parallel to a lot of these things that we're mentioning. And I really feel like, especially because we have such a the conditions right now are perfect for organizing. Like there's a lot of efforts to sort of push back against what we're seeing at the political levels of federal politics and the attempt to defund different nonprofits and things. And I see a really big resurgence of people who are motivated and they're really wanting to like get involved and find out what they can do. And it's really cool here in LA. I'm seeing like a really big collective effort to do a lot of like on the ground distribution of everything from information to meals. And a lot of that is pushing back against sort of like the immigration enforcement that we're seeing, the displacement element of it, and the fact that it makes it difficult to work. So all of these things are starting to overlap. We're talking about intersectionality, we're talking about, you know, building a sustainability and getting our own data in a cloud, you know, off the grid, and everything that we're talking about is sort of I don't want to say like cyberpunk, like everything's sort of heading in a direction of like eco, like people trying to learn new ways to do the things that we've been doing. And sort of on that element, one of the people that has helped us sort of engineer this panel in new ways as we've built it in the air is Violacious. And I know that you have a really good finger on the pulse as far as it comes to like tech. Like, what do you have to pitch in when we're talking about like ways of doing different things and how we're going to need to engineer new practices and new habits?
That is a lot to ask. I was just excited hearing you all talk about the community fridges and not knowing that that was a thing. And I looked it up and I found out that there are 7 of them in Seattle, at least. But I found an organization that does those, so that was really cool to see. I think a lot of what chat's been saying about doing what we can at home is great. Some of the other things that we're seeing are, like people were saying, the data centers not being in places where there aren't renewable resources, where we're needing to build power plants or restart old dirty coal power plants. Not saying that there can't be clean coal or clean nuclear or all these other things can have better versions of them, but we're firing up old power plants to try and juice up these data centers in places that really aren't sustainable for them. Like, it's a hot climate, so we have to add huge amounts of cooling and things like that. So there's a lot to be done in that space where they're just going, well, we can buy cheap land. So as the person who has the data center, I don't have to invest a lot. And we need to hold them accountable. We need to either move to other services if we can. If we can bring it home, great. It's really hard for a lot of people to do that. So I think that also goes back to the ethics of use and that conversation that we don't always have the luxury of being able to do that ourselves. If we're talking about buying our own hard drives and things like that, yes, we can encrypt, we can house in the cloud. That's still relying on these data centers and these large sources of large supported areas. That is an idiotic place to put a data center. Why are we putting them in the desert when we are already running out of water? Seriously. I mean, yeah, we have like a bunch of them
because land is cheap. I'm just gonna point out, like,
it
that's
absolutely
probably
we have a bunch in Quincy, Washington, and Washington's lucky. Like, almost 3/4 of our power is renewable, either from solar, wind, or 61% of the entire state is powered by hydroelectric. But even that, we're challenged with it because when we look at things like hydroelectric, we also have to look at the rivers, because what we ended up with is we put so many dams on the Columbia River that the downstream effect is a higher temperature in the water because it's become more stagnant. It's not moving as quick. That's going to raise the temperature. Now the fish are having a harder time going upstream, not just because of needing to get past the dams and fish ladders, but also the temperature in the water is so high that they're not able to come back and breed.
Oh, wow.
So now we're ending up in declines in population, completely unrelated to our original thought that, oh, well, if we just put a stream around the side of the dam, it'll be fine. It's like, well, no, these create bottlenecks. These create all of these issues for the wildlife. That creates all of these other systems to start to collapse. And so now we're kind of doing this retro look at this where we're going back and removing dams, even though now, like I said, it's 61% of our power generation. So how do we recreate that and create new sustainable forms of using the water to get power? So it can be water wheels on the side of the river that don't block the flow of water. It can be turbines down in the water. We see that in wave generation. Other things that are able to use the forces of the world to give us power or to create motion that don't require us to completely change the landscape and sink mountains underwater because we decided to put a wall in the middle of the river. So we're getting there, but it's a very long process. Each year, I think it's American Rivers is a good one to look up, and they keep track of how many dams they've been able to remove and the impacts of that on the rivers. We see that in like creek restorations where there's it's a salmon spawning stream, but it just looks like a ditch. Maybe it's 2 feet of water for half the year, and people are like, well, that's nothing, it's just a culvert that runs under the road, so why would I want to put more effort into this? And it's, oh, because in the winter all of a sudden this is a large thing, and it balloons from this little 2-foot deep creek to a 10-foot deep creek, and all of a sudden we have salmon coming through it in the fall, we have spawning through the winter, and in the spring we actually, even when it's down to that low flow, that's salmon fry going out to sea. So all of that restoration's happening. It's just that there's so much to do. Trying to keep up with chat is so much. Oh my gosh, the fish ladder or the fish telephone. I love that one where they couldn't put in a fish ladder, so they put a door in the dam, and you watch a live stream and call or push a button so that they open it up for the fish.
That's a thing.
That's the thing, yeah. The fish
Okay.
phone is
So
the thing.
cool.
That's an
The fish
actual,
phone.
yeah. That's a real thing that people can do and just have so much fun. No, please continue to be talkative. That's fantastic. I just won't keep up for a moment. It's really tough for me with stuff like we were talking about the Gen AI, and because its needs are so high right now. But you already hit on it, that when we see a technology launch, it demands a huge amount of resources, and we look at that at data centers. Then we start looking at things like distributed computing, and that's been a topic for the last decade, where it's just been this growing kind of community allowing parts of their non-used computing resources to be leveraged for these larger operations. And what does that look like at scale while still providing security? So if my computer is only using 50%, but it's on, so my power bill is going to be what my power bill is going to be. It's still going to use the whole power supply. Well, those other components in the computer could be doing something. And how does that work without putting all of my own personal data at risk? And what does that look like when parts need to be replaced and things like that? So at some point, I think that starts to happen. We're even seeing the inverse, though, where people that want to play games have low quality graphics controls in their computer, so they can actually use cloud-based computing for graphics processing for a video game, which is obviously the opposite of what we want. But those are all of the different things that we're seeing just continually balloon and change rapidly. What we use, I think, as individuals is also, it's still important. But just going back to what we were saying before, it's our choices need to not just be, we're using this and I'm going to use this because it's the right one to use, but using things and pushing back on the corporations that we see making those choices. Yeah, you made a choice to put your data center over there. You made a choice to, rip this mountain apart. And so we're not just not going to use your product, we're going to go to your competitor, or we're going to stop using this product altogether. And finding out where that balance is. We've all seen the movies where it's people just like rising up and, oh no, we're not going to use this, or down with the androids, or whatever, Detroit Become Human and stuff like that, where the people rise up against this. It's an anti-human ideal that's being pushed forward. So we're going to stand against it to keep our space. But how can we do that to continually make a difference? And with technology, I am way too embedded. I've talked about this before. Like, if I don't use the GPTs and the Claude and stuff like that, like, I get to sit down and have a meeting about my resistance and why I'm not using it as part of my day job. And I'm like, Well, because I just spent 2 hours arguing with the damn thing, and I could have just done a Google search and read somebody's blog about their grandma and how she used to do technology, and what do you know? The answer's right there, and I found it in 5 minutes. Like, but hey, I argued with a stupid computer for you for 2 hours. Thanks, boss.
Doesn't sound like a good use of energy or time.
Neither.
Mm-mm.
No. So we get stuck in that. So it's trying to find that balance for sure. I also I deal with the ethics of it a lot because I work in automation.
Mhm.
So my job for the last 20 plus years has been automating business process tasks. So you do word processing, sending emails, routing data, things like that. That's what I automate away. So I can't count the number of jobs that have probably been eliminated by the work that I do. And the companies look at it as a cost savings. Of course, that doesn't get passed on to me. So there's a lot of questions of it, but there's always going to be somebody that doesn't care about the ethics. It's just like, get me mine and I'm out. Like,
It's
it's
always
always going to be there.
cost savings, but it's like cost savings for who?
Yeah.
I'm not seeing
Yeah.
those cost savings.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you bring a good point when you talk about the balance and trying to strike the balance. Because I know, and I'm going to take a bit of a left turn here because we've talked about a lot of the things like that we can do, the actions that we can do, but there's two sides to that coin because you're talking about choices, you're talking about collectivization and trying to go with what is going to make the best impact, but as streamers and content creators, it is so easy to fall into like climate doom and like burnout because there's just like so much to keep up with all the time. And I'd like to hear honestly from each of you on this one because I think we all, as content creators and people on the internet, even the people in chat, have something to sort of say like, how do you balance between staying informed and for us using our platforms for advocacy without letting the doom scroll just like destroy your mental health completely? Where do you find the balance? What are your mechanisms and benchmarks? I'd love to hear this from each of you. And we can start with Ruthful if that's okay.
So I love the question. And I want to be clear that at least for me, and I think for probably most of us, it's a work in progress. I don't have it all figured out. I just do the best I can from a day-to-day perspective. I do feel like I said before, one of the antidotes to despair is hope and action. And so when I do find myself slipping into the feed, making me feel very pessimistic, making me feel like no matter what we do, there's all this backsliding. I find again that finding the people who are doing the work, the people who are having some wins or who are having setbacks but are still fighting, focusing on them, amplifying their voices and their stories can lift me out of it. And then doing things like this, organizing things like Seed or coming up with just any sort of action of like, hey, let's go to a park and do a park cleanup with a couple friends and then we'll have a picnic after. I do feel like it's important to, whenever possible, make activism fun for yourself to a point. Obviously, if we are dealing with a serious topic, we can't just come in all like, yay, here we are. But, there has to be, with any sort of volunteering, it has to be something that feels good to do, or else people aren't going to keep doing it. They're going to get burnt out. They're going to get depressed by the feelings that they experience while they're doing it. So I think that, and I think finding accounts online that you can share, that you can go to when your feed is very doom filled, that will again remind you of progress, keeping things moving forward, and just seeing like, oh, there are people who are working on this. I am not the only person who is like, what's going on? No, there are people who usually, like I said, being directly affected by it, who have said, we're going to do something about this. So yes, Artists. Always find the artists, find the helpers. Yeah.
Great advice. Yeah, no, I just recently interviewed a full stack developer by the name of Tig Benguela, who's working on something they called the Brain Fertilizer Wiki. And the whole concept was to start social media accounts from scratch using specific accounts to tailor your algorithm and your social media to be helpful instead of just being brain rot. So
Oh.
I completely, yeah, that's a great point and a great topic. And do you have any accounts that you could recommend specifically that you follow that you might recommend for folks to check out?
Yeah, there's one on Instagram that I especially love that I'm always like sharing her stories. It's the Garbage Queen, and I'll get the link. I'll pull it up in a tab and I'll throw it in the chat. But she talks about climate wins. It's the Garbage Queen, and she talks about just climate wins. Not only that, but she just has like, hey, look, they're doing this. These people are doing this. This country has done this. So it's very motivating in that way of just like, okay,
Amazing.
it's
I'm just going
not
to
all
highlight what
doom.
someone in chat said. They said, it's from a random Lemurian. We need MFI generated content that's meat and flesh intelligence.
Yes, random. That's it. That's her. It's the Garbage Queen.
And just to kick the same question over to C, how do you balance the climate doom and burnout with like not letting the doom scroll win, particularly because you're a scientist that's sort of studying this?
This is probably because I play way too much Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop RPGs, so this is my thing. But I always find that games inspire me a lot. For those of you who don't know, I play a lot of like Final Fantasy, Monster Hunter, and like the new Pokemon game came out. So I feel like because humans are so creative, it reminds me of the abominable human spirit where while there are a lot of atrocities and really horrific things happening, there's also a lot of good going on. So I try to really lean into that in terms of creativity. I think Indigenous and Afrofuturism is something that is a guidepost for me, where it helps me cultivate a lot of radical hope, even throughout the devastation that happens in life. And that as somebody again who is the descendant of those who were dealing with enslavement, going back to being black, because it's as folks say, African April, after Black History Month. People who came up before me were in certain conditions that they broke the chains for. Arguably, there are still conditions that persist from history that are problematic, that impact people who look like me every day. But because of that, because someone had a bright imagination and future, there is something to look forward to. So that's something that I live with a lot, and know that sometimes it's bigger than me in regards to what's possible. And I really encourage folks in terms of like, you don't have to be a scientist like me or go to school to like really ask where you're getting your information from. Because a lot of the sources that I really get thoughts from is folks like y'all in terms of creatives, folks who live at different intersections. And I really curate my feed. That's something I definitely recommend. It's just like ask who's doing this research project and why they're doing it. Is there a motive behind it? Are they trying to convince you to buy a product? And I know sometimes it doesn't take it. It takes a lot more time. We might not have like a few minutes to vet, but I try to bounce between like being around technology and again my D&D plug is I'm very much a person to solar punk or noble bright future. So I try to think about like what does 2050 look like, and I'm in 2026. So what's my part in that? Because I feel like everybody has a role in activism and organizing and engaging with community that they can think through. Whether it's like, hey, maybe I might be the person who starts a community garden in my neighborhood, or maybe you're like Vi, who's thinking about these things ethically in terms of technology from home. Like, it's a lot of these things of like, we all play roles that create the world that we live in. And that just brings me a lot of hope that there's folks who are thinking about the ethics of science or who are also sharing resources so that people can be informed and educated. Because that's a lot of the lane I live in as a scientist of like, let's have a conversation and let me break it down for you from a health perspective. But also, there are these really cool people you can talk to in your local neighborhood or your local library who also have resources as well. So that's where on the plug of resources, honestly, I subscribe to my local library. And I also like really pay attention to folks at marginalized intersections, especially a lot of Black women and femmes and thems. as well as folks who are formerly incarcerated or people who have been touched by systems of oppression. I listen to a lot of global perspectives in books, as well as folks who have been directly impacted by these issues the most. That helps inform where I'm coming from, but also recognize where my privilege I could use as a scientist to be able to support advocacy or awareness on a project or initiative. So hope that answers the question. But that's how I stay hopeful. Like I'm a very hopeful person. And I hope to stay that way, even despite the fact that stuff is really heavy. But I'm like, nah, it is what it is. We're gonna do great. So yeah.
I feel like you could write a paper on this and I would read it like really enthusiastically. So thank you for your answer. Yeah, and I just want to point out, like I was sort of kicking around. I was jokingly saying like we're facing this like cyberpunk future. Like what are we gonna do about it? I guess the answer is solar punk future. Like that's the response. So thank you so much for just like answering that question holistically. And I guess I'll then turn it over to Violacious, someone else I know who has their finger on the pulse with tech and stuff. And just how do you steer out of the doomerism and steer into the hope? What is your
First, I want to address something that somebody said in chat that they need to get more library cards. I have two of mine here, my King County and my Snow Isle, which are both on my desk because I need to renew both of them. So yes, plug the library. Fantastic resource. And yeah, I'm lucky enough to have companion libraries, so I can go to libraries all over this area. The Downtown Seattle Library is a separate library, but it has companions to the others. But yeah, there's so many good libraries in the area. Anyways, I really loved what both Ruth and C were saying, where they were talking about this, find good news. There's bad news, but there's good news at the same time. And there are people doing amazing works. Like I was talking about earlier, American Rivers going out and doing work to remove the dams and restore our fish habitats. And there are a lot of other organizations like that. I have some patents in some environmental technology, but this is not about plugging my stuff. But the goal with that is we know that there are areas of the world that are becoming uninhabitable and that climate change is causing devastation. We're seeing that with huge wildfires and things like this. And it's really easy for me to just sit in my house and be like, well, with my asthma, I can't go outside. And I have to sit here next to my air purifier and just wait for smoke season to end. That's really a bummer. But I can also look at that and say, okay, but we have, in some parts of the world, we have an abundance of water, we have an abundance of nature, and we have these positive influences. And in other places, we have areas where trees and farms and things are drying up. So if we can start to look globally at how we transfer water from one spot to another, we can turn some of these deserts into green spaces. And we're seeing that happen in other parts of the world where they're putting down straw mesh and turning sandy areas into farmable land. So collectively, we've got all of these really good things going, and we're finding answers to these problems of how do we manage a population that's so high in so many places and so many places that have already been devastated. As it starts to shift, we have to start addressing that. Now, does that mean that we can save Phoenix, Arizona? Probably not. Like it's probably toast and people should probably just get out of there before it hits 200 degrees. But somewhere that's more coastal California and there's, breezes coming off the ocean and mountains up against it, we probably have a pocket there that we can restore. So starting to look at where are places that people can live more sustainably is going to be really helpful. And seeing the news of people who are coming up with technologies, doing the work to restore those areas, whether it be the river deltas or, like I said, sandy areas and turning them into usable farms. It's the same technology that we need to figure out if we're going to populate other planets. So we have our scientists, our farmers, our just everyday people are all interested in it. And so seeing those kind of things really kind of gives me hope. I have my own other things where I can just be despair. So I'll leave that out there.
Well, I've definitely seen, and I know a lot of that, the practice of putting the straw vertically is being pioneered by like China and the
Yeah.
edge of I guess the Siberian desert, or whatever that desert is on the edge of Asia. So
Mhm.
I know what you're talking about. We're definitely coming up with new things. And on that note, I'm not going to let you just blow past it. This is a panel, and you are a panelist. So I would love to hear about these environmental patents that you just tried to breeze past.
Okay, fine. So a company that I'm a part of, somebody I'm gonna have on my own stream later today with my uncle, is called River Recycler Systems. And it came out of this idea originally proposed in the 1970s by the governor of Alaska to put in some pipelines from uh, Alaska down to Southern California. And the method that was proposed back then would not have moved enough water and it was far too expensive. So we came up with some different ideas and essentially it's a fire hose, but it's 100 feet in diameter. So it's one of the most ambitious pipes that we could think of. We've talked to factories about what it would take to make it, talked to some of the largest fishing companies on how we could actually drop it down and get ships large enough to carry that and put it out in the ocean. We've been looking at the science of actually moving water at those volumes without running into pumping issues and what kind of different things we would need to do to move such distances since it's thousands of miles. But in conjunction with that, we looked at how do we collect the water as well? Because if we're just pumping it, you know, 100 miles inland and then putting it into this pipe, is that really doing any good? So we started looking at using a skimming technology, and this is based off of what fishers do. Commercial fishing companies will actually skim fresh water off of the top of the salt water outside of the Amazon River because it floats out. And because of the density before it actually gets mixed, there's a certain amount of distance out from the mouth of the Amazon River that fresh water can still be harvested. And so we started looking at, well, the least impactful way that you could gather fresh water would be the moment before it turns into salt water. You don't have to do desalination, but it's also served its entire purpose for the river and the ecosystems that are there. And then we looked at that and said, okay, well, what do we do during the dry season when the rivers are running low and they're muddy and everything else? So we also included an offshore reservoir that would use a geotextile fabric to create a floating reservoir in the ocean so we could actually create storage for fresh water within the ocean instead of taking up large swaths of land in order to do that as well. So there's a number of them. It's a pretty big patent, but we did get that patented a few years back, and so we're working on it. We'll see if we can get it going. But that's why I wanted to join this. I was like, yeah, this it's not my day-to-day life, it's not what's paying my bills, but it is something that I'm passionate about, and so
No,
hoping that
that's
sometime
amazing.
we can get that going.
I honestly, I struggle to sort of grasp what you're talking about, but it does make sense. I don't understand
We
how it's
can,
possible, but
on a
I understand
separate
what you're
discussion,
saying.
we can go all into it.
Okay, cool.
That is
Yeah,
so
no.
cool. Mhm.
I really appreciate that. Do you want to throw some accounts out that you would suggest to follow, or is there some source of
Well, like I said,
information?
that one we're very much in like discovery and trying to get it out there, so we're not really doing anything as far as accounts are concerned and that side of things. But like I was saying, like American Rivers, there are like water.org, things like that that are really focused on getting water out to people in need around the world, whether it be getting water to communities that don't have fresh drinking water, or getting water out to farms in areas that are really struggling to provide food and water, and getting rid of those insecurities, um, are some of those most important things. Like I said, I'm talking about a giant pipeline, but it doesn't have to be a giant pipeline. It can be, a truck full of water getting to people in need in a community can make a huge difference. And we see that in temperatures. When plants are there, the temperatures are cooler than if we just have concrete. I know that there's places, this goes back to that like positive thing. One of the other headlines I recently saw was a city, I'm feel like it's in Southern California, but I don't remember which one it was. But they realized that they didn't need as much concrete as they had. They had too much sidewalk and too much road. And so they started breaking up sections of it and putting in not quite green belts, but like a 2-3 foot strip of wildflowers and things like that, giving homes to pollinators and birds. And like I said, it has that natural cooling effect. We know that from trees that there's a downstream cooling effect that comes from them. So it's the same with flowers, just on a much smaller scale. You're not going to feel like, if you put your hand under a flower, it probably isn't going to feel colder. But if you stand under a tree, even in the sun, it's cooler than if you're standing out in the open of a field. So we see those kind of effects. And so yeah, it's just all of those
Cool.
little things are progress, and we'll get there.
Yeah.
That is so cool. Sorry, can I jump in for
No,
just a
please, go ahead,
second?
please.
So what you've been talking about with dams and with water. So I read a book called Cadillac Desert a few years ago, and it's all about dams and water in the American West and about starting to dismantle some of the dams. And I became convinced that living in Southern California was not a long-term strategy. I've been here for over 20 years, but I joke with my husband, but not joke, like, we're not retiring in Southern California. We're going to have to move because we're going to run out of water and everyone's going to have to move. But knowing now, just from this conversation, that there are people who are working on this problem is just so, like, I don't think everyone can stay in Southern California. And I agree with you, Phoenix probably can't save it. But there's this notion of just like, yeah, I should have realized there's somebody working on this. Someone else has already spotted this problem, has already started coming up with solutions. And it just feels so good to know that there are folks who are working on it. So thank you for that. Thank you to you and your uncle and everyone who's working on that.
For sure. Yeah. No, I'm glad you stepped in to say that. I really wasn't aware of those technologies either. So it's really cool that you got a chance.
It's still a long way off, but fingers are crossed.
Cool. Well, I definitely have a bit to add about this myself. Being someone that organizes in Los Angeles, and I've sort of been what I like to jokingly refer to like as the playing field for a while, just sort of doing community work, aware of the projects and collective efforts to sort of tackle a lot of the things that we're talking about here. And as far as when it comes to avoiding the doomerism and trying to steer towards the hope and the positivity, I'm going to mention something that C talked about earlier, and that's community. Because for most people, the thing that's going to bring you back is going to be community. Like when you feel yourself start to lose yourself to the dark thoughts and lose yourself to the nihilism, it's people that will usually bring you back. And it really goes back to seeing how these things affect not just you, but also your neighbors, and just seeing how your neighbors can push back. Like I mentioned earlier, we're seeing like organizing efforts under these current conditions are bolstered. When you think that like people would be, I don't want to say like giving up, but it's easy to feel like it's helpless. But I'm seeing that you have organizations like, I'm sure everyone's aware of the Green Party and the work that they do politically to try to get candidates that are actually aware of our current climate situation. But there are a lot of candidates that aren't even necessarily in the Green Party now actually talking about these things when it comes to like, climate issues and the emerging technologies. And for me, what really gives me hope is that I see people talking about these things that, I don't know, 5-10 years ago, not to date myself, I'm definitely UNC status, but I've seen candidates that before would not go anywhere near these issues to like now these are on their actual like their websites. These are part of their like actual talking points and their platforms. So for me, it's like supporting the people that, like you said, there are people working on these things. But also I see people in, like, I guess, potential positions of power that could actually do something that are now actually talking about these things. So on the side of like collective action and getting the data centers and showing up to city council and making sure that it's not taking advantage of these places where people are normally taken advantage of socioeconomically. We're also now seeing like a greater collectivization of, say, like housing, because like I have lived, like I mentioned, I've managed this cooperative in Los Angeles, and they've done a lot of experiments on how to use different technologies in ways that wouldn't necessarily be uh, thought of. A good example I can point out would be they have a solar hot water collection system, being in Los Angeles, excuse me, and having so much, roof space that does have direct sunlight coming in the Los Angeles Valley. They can actually cut a good amount of their consumption of their natural gas off using solar. And that was something that at the time of emerging technologies with solar was an application that not a lot of people were striving for, but it can be done. I've also seen a lot of the urban gardens that we've mentioned tapped into the local food distribution and getting urban garden, the produce actually distributed. Thank you so much for the follow. Actually distributed to these community refrigerators and things. And so for me, the doomerism and trying to steer out of it comes to just paying attention to those efforts, these groups that are just like tackling these issues and just trying to support them. And of course, I have my own work with the land trust and stuff and trying to stay involved with that. But on that point, that leads me to point out, like, you see all these efforts, but each of these efforts have their own set of skills. And when I want to talk about like who to point people to follow, is like there are different groups of people that have these skill sets that will teach them to you. So on that vein of learning how to do these different things is going and adapting these skill sets so that you can then emulate and help sort of bring that knowledge to your immediate community. And a lot of that is like, community garden efforts and urban gardening, composting, learning how to use like there's ways to water plants using like pottery. Thank you so much for the follow. It's a Native American concept that has been used for thousands of years, but as we're like facing these new water struggles, like using I can't remember the name of them, but it's like burying a clay pot in the ground and filling it with water to throughout the day distribute this water is now a practice that we're revisiting out of necessity. And just paying attention to who's doing what, going and take a workshop, spend time in community with people, learn about what's happening, bring it back to your immediate community. Yes, cloche. I think that is the term. So we are finding that resilience in community, or at least in my immediate spaces and my immediate communities. And that's sort of my take on that, is to go out and touch grass and talk to people. And then sort of on that point, I mean, we're all talking about like the knowledge that we have. I know that we all probably have some great reading recommendations that I don't want to miss an opportunity to kind of share some of the things that we've been inspired by lately that perhaps we've read, or projects that we're aware of that we could point people to find more inspiration. Does anybody have anything off the top of their head that they would want to share? Any books, movies?
I don't have any books or movies. I mean, anything about space at this point is probably a good idea. Just seeing like, what's happening with crops, because they talk about, blight and things like that in these space movies, but those are real issues that we face. And so being aware of and knowing, some of the things that we can do to combat that now is obviously a good idea. Yeah, you see Anika, she's right here next to me at the moment, wanting all of my attention. No, what I was going to say though, you kind of talked about some things with the community gardens and stuff like that. There are some farming co-ops right now. If you have a house with a backyard and you're thinking, "Oh, well, I couldn't grow, much, or I couldn't have a full garden, or maybe I don't have a green thumb." There are gardening co-ops that will actually rent square footage from your garden, help set up those beds and farm with you to help feed the community. So that's a great way to go. Finding local ones in your area or starting one if there isn't one, is another great thing, because I'm sure that your neighbors have, space for a few beds as well. And pretty soon you realize that the entire neighborhood has vegetables and fruits for 6 to 9 months out of the year without going to a grocery store, without driving a truck, just by walking down the road and saying hi to each other. So that builds community and takes care of people at the same time. And on that same vein, I know from where my house was, they partnered with a group called Lawns to Lettuce, which is another good one, because our grass is, it's harmful to biodiversity. It's harmful to, we're mowing it and things like
Ooh,
that.
monoculture.
Yeah, exactly. But they partner up with groups like military veterans who have come home and are having trouble finding work. So they give, like, the city that I used to live in gave jobs to vets who couldn't find work to come out to houses and put in what they called rain gardens, but it was vegetable and fruit producing gardens with rain barrels that they would hook up to your gutter systems and things like that. So they would collect the rainwater, water the garden through underground channels, very much like what you were talking about. They would do like a false creek through a yard, so it would be covered in rocks and other things, but it would actually have a water line running underneath to just gravity feed water to these gardens. That same city also had a trees program where they would give you a certain budget if you planted trees at your house, and then you'd be given the option of different trees. So with that type of a program, you could choose some evergreen trees, or you could choose to plant a couple of apple trees and a pear tree. And again, having that, that food producing item that can be right there in your front yard or your backyard, just really easily, and not demanding a lot of maintenance and stuff on your part. Just here's a little bit more greenery, a little bit of biodiversity, and a little bit of food that, it's not 100% free, but at that point it's pretty darn close. So I would say definitely see if you have programs like that in your area, because at least in most of the suburban areas, you probably do.
Yeah, and on that, I looked up the pot. It's called an Oya, or an Oya. And
Okay.
on that, what you're describing is what I've heard called gray water. Um,
Not quite. You can do gray water gardens, yes. Um, my dream is to have an earth ship. So if you want to go down that hole, there's
that's a
another
whole journey.
giant discussion we can have. But that uses a gray water system to funnel out through, a drain field into feeding a garden,
So
um,
I
of plants
have
that are
seen a gray water
sustained for it.
system again at the co-op that I managed in Los Angeles, the LA Eco Village. If anybody wants to
Okay.
look it up, um, in addition to the solar hot water, they do have a gray water system that is also tied into the rain tanks. I believe they have rain collection tanks, huge rain collection tanks, hundreds of gallons. That is also tied into I think 6 apartments drains go directly into the gray water drainage system that then goes into the apartment grounds to water fruit trees, gardens, and then that's also attached to. I think there's 2 washers, one that's inside in the second floor, and one that's outside in the courtyard. That's exclusively gray water, and whenever you wash clothes, you have to use a special soap so that it doesn't break down the microbes in the soil. It's like an enzyme based soap. So these are things you can do, depending how much you want to commit to trying to you know lowering the impact and raising the conservation. And I definitely think, like, as it comes out, like, a lot of times people frame sort of like urban greening or like living eco-friendly, as sort of like a luxury way of living. I know that oftentimes people think of like like green and environmental as needing to have like, you know, a certain level of expenditure to come in to actually make an impact. And I'd love to hear from each of you, like, what do you know as like small things you can do? What are some small daily things we can do to sort of help point us in the direction of more sustainable living? And I'll, you know, let's go backwards this time. Let's start with Violacious this time.
Oh, sure. Bring it back over here. Um, Gosh, we've talked so much about like what the big corporations can do and things like that, and we talked a bit about our choices and just being mindful of what we're doing and why we're doing it. Yeah, no pressure, thanks. um, but no, look into what we can do with where we're at and what we have. Um, there was conversation about gardening in a pot on your balcony if you've got an apartment or something like that, and just taking advantage of the things that we can. It could mean walking to the store instead of driving because you're just going a couple of blocks to go over and grab a soda. Like little things like that can make a big difference and are easy enough for all of us to do without a lot of thought or planning or anything like that. Um, the joke of turning off the lights or turning down the heat, those things. Um, Not being able to afford a car or gas means relying on public transportation. Public transportation is fantastic too. We finally have a usable train here in Seattle, and I was like, I don't want to use the light rail. Oh my gosh, this seems like such a mess. Okay, but it's $6 per person for an entire day, and I can travel for like 12 hours back and forth all over the city. Like, okay, yeah, it was going to cost me at least 12 to park my car. That doesn't even include wear and tear, time, gas. Like, okay, it's a deal. I'll walk the 1 mile to the train and hop on and go spend an entire day popping around town having fun. That's a great point. I know it's a necessity, not choice, but it's a wonderful choice too. Okay, I'll shut up.
Yeah, that's a great one. I love public transportation.
That wasn't my idea.
For anybody that looks on my social media, you will see so many stories posted on the subway. It's just kind of my vibe. Let's go and pass this to C, just to keep.
So I can share some. First, again, my bias. I love reading books. I'm really like the nerd in me is super strong, so that's just never going to change. Like ever, if anybody knows me. So I have 3 book recommendations I'll drop. So one, the Cyber Feminism Index, I highly recommend. It's a book that's coming out that has website links about the history of feminism in terms of the tech space. And there are URL links you can put that go to these website links. So I'm going to recommend that. I'm also going to recommend Low Tech, Designed by Radical Indigeneity, which is a really cool book about modern and traditional influences from indigenous scientists and perspectives on climate change. I think it's one of my favorite books. I like to go through it. It's really well done. And then the last recommendation I'll give is Race After Technology by Ruha Benjamin, where it talks about like digital blackface and these topics around like technology, racism, and health type things. So those are 3 book recommendations. You want to check them out. To answer the question, one thing I think about is I love stationery, so I'm into like journaling and such. Honestly, I know it's like I think it's being more popular now, but junk journaling is something I love to do. I like to just reuse things a lot. So papers, magazines, even books, like not necessarily tearing books apart because I love having my own little library, but just like paper and resources to kind of like journal and scrapbook. Because another thing I really enjoy and really encourage is people to record things from what's going on today. So writing in a journal or even keeping historical archival information of what was going on the week of, I don't know, April 2026 this week. Like doing that type of thing, because you never know in terms of recording for yourself for like mental health reasons in terms of journaling, but just keeping an archive of what's going on in the world is really helpful in terms of making sense of what's going on and talking to people. But besides junk journaling, one thing I definitely try to do is just honestly go through my like clothes and my stuff and give it away to local libraries and areas. Not like stuff that's not reusable, but just knowing to do more with less is something I often talk about. Like I love really nice things and to give myself something really great because I love fashion and makeup. I'm a professional makeup artist along with a scientist, but I always think about like, can I give away some resources? Because do I really need this thing? Like, do I really try to like think about sustainability when it comes to fashion and recycling, but also like reusing my technology too is something again, which is why I've been talking about a lot this during this panel today, because it's something I do often where I'm like, I'm just gonna give away some clothes and books, and honestly, I don't need 50 pens, so let me just think about budgeting and saving or giving this to someone who might be able to use it. So I'm into like bartering and mutual aid a lot because of that, because I think there's a real push sometimes for hyper consumerism. And that's something I just try to think about every day of like, how can I not consume so much with things I don't need? Because how many clothes do I actually need? Like how many dresses do I actually need to use type of thing? And can I learn how to embroider or tailor my clothes so I can reuse them for a long and short term type of thing? So definitely recommend those tips along with those books.
That was great. As usual, you gave a fully comprehensive answer with citations. Thank you. And then we'll steer this one over to Ruthful LA. How about you? What's your recommendations for small things that we could do? Because I know we said it's not on the consumer, but like collectivism is about a bunch of small things together. So what does that mean to you?
Right. Right. Well, I think one of the most important things that you can do is to just find an area, in addition to doing the other things that everyone has mentioned, find an area that really resonates with you. Because I do think that one thing that can happen when you really start to dive into this is it can feel so overwhelming because there are so many angles to come at environmentalism from. And if you find the one or few areas that really resonate with you, you can know it's okay. Someone else is working on that other stuff. I don't have to be plugged into all of the action and all of the news on every single front. I can put my energy towards public transportation or water and water rights and water distribution or animals or whatever it is. um, Kind of giving yourself a bit more focus, I think can be very helpful, because then anytime you are deciding what can I do to contribute, you're looking at it through that lens rather than being kind of overwhelmed by all of the options. I definitely agree with C about um, doing more with less. I do. This is now the second year that I'm doing it. It's the No New Clothes pledge, and it's just something that I came up with and was just like, you know what? I have a ton of clothes already. If I need something that is new to me, there's thrift stores that I love. I love thrifting. There's buy nothing groups. There's clothing swap parties with my friends. There are other ways of getting the garments that I need than going to a store and buying it new off of the rack. I do give myself a few exceptions. Undergarments, I can buy those new. And my work shoes, because I need non-slip shoes because I work in food and beverage. Those I can buy new because they need to have a good sole to them. But I should also mention I'm an admin for my local Buy Nothing group. So even though Facebook
Thank
sucks,
you.
I am on it because I can help my neighbors share their resources. And I think that's a great way to kind of go about it. When we were talking about libraries, I mentioned in the chat, and I'll say it here on the stream, that a lot of libraries these days have not just books and movies, but they have tools. They have items that you can borrow, whether it's, a rake and a hoe for your garden, or whether it's a sewing machine because you want to make some repairs on some clothing. You don't need to go buy it. You can borrow it.
Not to butt in, I just have to
Yeah,
mention because
please.
you totally reminded me. If anyone lives in Los Angeles and you're a member of the Los Angeles LA Public Library, there are
Mm,
3D printers downtown that you can use. There are like
mhm.
podcasting studios you can use. Look into the resources that your local library offers. Sorry.
Yeah.
Please continue.
No, that's exactly that was one of the things I was thinking of. The Octavia Butler lab there at the main library is so cool. But even out, because I now live in the Inland Empire, I no longer live in Los Angeles, but I go there often for work and for play. And it's not that far for people who are not familiar with the area, but there are some people in LA who think I now live in Siberia. But even my local library out here in the Inland Empire has a lending library of items, not just books. So if you live in a suburban area, it's very possible that your library has some things. And if they don't, that is something you could always go in and ask them, is this something you'd be interested in? You know, I think as individuals, one thing that we can be aware of is that we can always ask. We can go to our city council meetings and say, hey, I would really like you all to be investing more in green spaces. What will that take? You know, they may say no. They may not even react to you, but they may say yes. Or you may go and find out that actually they have something in the works already. And wouldn't you like to be a part of helping us make this thing happen? So I do think that putting it out there whenever you have a thought like that, going to find who is working on this or who is a decision maker who I can bring this to, it's always worth asking.
Very well
Yeah.
said. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like we've given just like a plethora of ways people can tap in, ways to sort of win the mental game when it comes to like building this sustainable future. And just to touch on a couple of the themes that I think that we're all sort of reiterating, we're all saying, you know, we need to learn to do more with less. We need to look at old technologies. We need to look at recycling. We need to look at minimizing our impact, not to take you know, the blame off of the corporations and everything, but we can as individuals do things to help build this future that we all know is possible. The one that we've sort of hinted at is sort of a solar punk future, but also we've all mentioned that we need to tap into what already exists in our communities. And I also want to just sort of, as an organizer that's been out there in the trenches trying to get things done, you will burn a lot of energy trying to start something new. And everybody wants to start something new. I cannot say enough about like looking at what already exists and tapping into it, not just as like a conservation element, but also as an anti-burnout sort of practice. And then we're all sort of saying the same thing, and I'm really relieved to hear this echoed throughout everyone's answers. Hope is the opposite of despair. We're all saying not to give in to the despair, lean into community, look as to the efforts that are going on. It's not the time to give up. We should all be fighting for that future that we know that is possible. That's why we're fighting. That's why the other side is fighting so hard, is because they know we have a chance. Otherwise, they wouldn't be trying to stop us. That's how that works. So what do we have to, like, I know we're almost running out of time here. We're coming up at about 15 minutes left. What do we have to share with what we think is possible in the future? Because we've all talked about like the things we know that exist and what AI might be doing to our future. What do you imagine? Like, what are we fighting for? What is the future that you envision? And I want to start with C on this one. Let's go to our scientists.
For me, if I was in 2050, I do think there can be like a lot of technology that's very life affirming. And when I say that, I imagine often of like technology being in your hands. Technology that'll tell you like, hey, here's what's going on in your local environment. Here's how the air is. Here's how like, you know, here's what's going on in your community. Here's ways to get involved. Things that are very clean, very thoughtful, gives folks access to the right to information and education. Community gardens and community centers that are very open and green and have like UV lights and radiation to make sure like no infectious disease particles are out or things like that, thinking of like what's going on with like flu and different diseases going on in the world. Folks having the ability to, have access to housing, just a lot of like systemic and structural um, things that people talk about often when it comes to resources for people. Thinking about the ways in which folks can govern together. And I think of, again, data sovereignty, where folks can share information in a way that is respectful of their bodily autonomy, but also the bodily autonomy of other people and communities. There's also a synergy where like communities aren't speaking for each other because we all have different needs and concerns. We all come from different perspectives. And as I always say, Blackness is not a monolith like other folks, but celebrating cultures, celebrating communities, celebrating food and language, and not having any of those things diminished, but having like decentralized leadership is something that I really think about, and really collaborative like partnership. That's where I live often in public health and science, but that's what I think and dream of all the time because I've seen it, where people are able to advocate for laws and policies and practices, but it's a sense of cooperation, mutualism that is very beautiful and nice, which is why, again, I believe in that noble, bright, and solar punk future where, again, some places might not be habitable 10, 20 years from now. But I think that the ways in which we can create infrastructure, clean air, transportation and housing and education and just all these different social and structural determinants of health, as I call them in the spaces I occupy. The way we live, grow, and learn together, like neurons that fire and charge and build these information highways in our head, can manifest in real life. So that's kind of the dreams I sit on and I envision all the time in terms of like, what's a video game I think of? Honestly, this is not, I'm not sponsored by anything, but I think of Loftia and I think of Pokeopia, just rebuilding things and doing it with community and animals and organisms by our side. So that's the future I'm moving towards. And as a scientist who often my work is behind the scenes, my thing I always say as a joke is, and I always say the name wrong. There's a gag for the new Pokemon game. But I always say it's a gag that like if you don't hear if something is resolved, you're not going to hear about it. If you hear about it, it means it's a problem. So that's kind of my thing, is to get myself out of a job is what I live for. But I think that's kind of the future I envision, and where I think it's possible with those most directly impacted by issues at the center of those paradigm shifts and at the center of that advancement in terms of things. Because sometimes people confuse science and efficiency for progress, and I don't actually believe all progress is good. I actually believe that progress that's made with people at the center and humans and animals and groups is always the most important. So as long as those who are most directly impacted by issues and the most marginalized are leading the charge and given the resources and the ability to do that, then the future is very bright. And I'm a big believer in that. So yeah.
Really well said. I think that turns really, really well into Phylaceous. And I know you've already talked about how you are actually building hands-on like technologies that will help shape the future. But if you were to go even further than that, what is the future that you envision for like what are we striving for? What are we shooting for? What is it that what are we trying to do?
I think it's really interesting, and I've been one of those people that's panicked. I'm a software developer by day right now, and so everything that's happening is like, oh, you've got a year and a half, 2 years, you're out of work. And I've been talking with a lot of people about it, that this future of us not needing to work is very close. Um, there's always been this fear that, oh, well, if people don't work, well, then who's going to be providing the food and who's going to be delivering it and who's doing all of this? Well, we have automated farming, mining, driving, forklifts, factory operations. Like, we have automated the production line from the planting of the seed to it coming out of the grocery store into your hands. It's already done. It just needs to be put in place. So with that in mind, with the fact that last year we had a robot surgery on a pig to replace an organ, where all they did is they told the robot, go do this. And it said, okay, there's the bad one. we're going to do this, we're going to stitch it up, and that it was a complete success. That we're already using those technologies in operating rooms right now to stitch up patients so that they can free up the doctors and the nurses and the surge techs to move on to the next patient. The future we have to look at with a vast reduction, if not a complete removal of the human workforce. And what does that actually free us up to do? It frees up our imagination. There are so many beautiful things and beautiful places in this world, so many experiences that we get to have together. So I envision a future where we have figured out how to help people to see purpose in finding joy.
Oh, that's
Because we've
beautiful.
seen so much as purpose is the means of production and not just the means of enjoying ourselves. So that's my hope.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much. Rupal, as the person who brought this group of minds together, what do you see in the future? What are we all fighting for?
So I don't know if I can even follow that. That was so good. um, I I love it. I'm a huge fan of Star Trek, and obviously now that we have these newer series where they're showing kind of that transition time, it takes them a while to eventually get to the point where all your food can be made with replicators and your survival needs have been worked out, and now it's about what can you with your unique talents and your unique perspective contribute to the whole. And I to me that is ultimately the goal of life, is to figure out what gifts you have that you can give to make the world a better place for the people who are here now and the beings that are here now, and also for the future. Because ultimately, even if we're not going to be there to see it, someone will be there. Our descendants, our siblings' descendants, there will be humans or not, but hopefully there will be. And they have to live with the world that we are creating right now. And I always kind of think back to this quote of time travelers are always so worried about doing some tiny thing when they're in the past that's going to just change the future. And we here in the present aren't thinking that necessarily. We aren't thinking, "Oh, if I do this thing right now, if I talk
Mhm.
to this person." Yeah, but it does. It does in the same way. And so yeah, I would just love to see us all living the good versions of Star Trek, where we can be pursuing art, pursuing advancement of life, because we have solved the other problems. And I do see it taking a long time to get there, but I
Yeah.
also see people working on it right now who are saying, let's share our resources, let's share our knowledge, let's share our spaces. So, yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. And that was such an epiphany. Like, everybody in every time travel movie is worried about that. You're completely right. And we could all be looking for that small thing that we're going to do that sets off the chain, that the butterfly effect to like fix everything. That is so real. Um, and I guess I'll go ahead and add my piece. I mean, I've been talking about it a lot, and I'm all about like decommodifying land, and what that actually means for me is in the future, I see collectively owned and collectively governed land. I see people in the seat of power to make decisions about where they live for themselves. And for me, that's really important. We talked about decentralization of power. And I think a lot of that comes down to us actually having a say and having a seat at the table. And that starts with where we live. And so a lot of my work and what I work on, I am currently the treasurer for the Beverly, Vermont Community Land Trust. And a lot of what we're fighting for is keeping residents in the communities that they grew up in. And in addition to that, also giving them a seat at the table so that they can collectively decide, make these decisions. And honestly, the more co-ops that we can set up to make those collective decisions for themselves, the less we even have to keep up with at the land trust because they're managing their home. We don't have to. And just how that can proliferate to become this greater movement of collective ownership and collective governance. And that's just sort of the future that I see, that I hope that we're all sort of building towards. And that, of course, includes, gardens and community fridges and everything that we can imagine to make the world a better place. And I'm really excited to be building that future together with all of you. And I'm just glad to have been a part of this conversation. I know we are a part of the raid train and we need to start sort of coordinating the next stop of the raid train. But I do want to give a chance if anybody has anything that they wanted to add here at the end. Also, chat. We want to hear your book recommendations. What are you reading that's keeping you grounded and informed? And also, other content creators, feel free to tag them and shout them out. Everyone here is sort of think tanking what we know is going on. And somebody said, I don't know who said it, but I think it's really important that everyone just picks one topic that you're really, really passionate about and just find a group or a person that is already working to address that problem. Go support them and join them and join us. Join us as we work to build this sustainable future.
Yes. Yes. Oh, actually, that was a quick thing that I just wanted to say. We when you start working in an area, you find other people who are working in that area. That happened with me with Seed. I started it 3 years ago. Just this year, I learned that Steam has a whole Earth Appreciation Festival where they like give keys to streamers to stream environmentally themed games. And I'm just like, this is amazing. Amazing. All of those people count as seeds, even if they don't know it.
We're going to get them
So-
in the panel next year.
There you go.
Mhm,
There you
mhm.
go. Yeah, any reading or suggestions? Would love that.
Yeah, I didn't
there
know
we go.
about
We got some.
Steam's Earth event either. That was news for me. I'm excited to, when we
Yeah.
wrap up here, I'm going to go jump into my Steam library and start looking at that.
Yeah, do it. It's so cool.
Nothing is more dangerous than a Steam event,
Or a humble bundle. Oh yeah.
right? Yeah.
Right on.
Yep.
Give us a year of nonstop gaming.
Ooh, we have from chat. I think one thing that intrigues me is how games about cleaning up and saving the earth impact and inspire people to do the same in real life. That's a cool note.
Absolutely.
I'll be honest, like the thought of like Minecraft and how you can craft your own environment and build everything, I think led a lot of other people to start thinking about like how you can engineer your environment or otherwise like completely like reinvent a space. I think Minecraft was a good thing for people's understanding of just like how much you can actually affect your own environment around you.
The same way as Legos or anything like that. It's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
toys and games that inspire imagining what the world could be. Like if you could manipulate it, what it could be. And hopefully it's not all just chicken cookers.
Yeah, erector sets were a big part of that. I know.
Oh yeah.
Mm.
Through like the 80s and 90s, a lot of the toys, the building, the engineering toys were synonymous with just trying to like do it yourself, because oftentimes you couldn't find the thing, and nowadays you can 3D print anything, but like back then you would just have to use like the engineering toys to try to devise some type of solution.
Oh yeah.
And now we're in a
And-
new you can just scan it and put it on a 3D printer and design the thing that you need.
I realized from this that I have to join my local tool library because I looked it up after the conversation because I knew there was one, but I hadn't really gone and checked it out. And my renter's lawnmower is broken. So that's something I provide. And there's like a dozen of them available to borrow from the tool library.
There you
That's
go.
awesome.
Nice.
And then you don't have to buy a thing. And then
I mean, I
store it.
still do because that's in the lease, but other than that, my own agreement with my renters.
That's true.
I like them, so it's fine.
I wonder if you could get them to sign a release that knowing that there's a lawnmower at the local tool library, if they'll just
That they could just go borrow
they
one.
release
Yeah.
you
Mhm.
and just go use the local tool library. Maybe you could
Possibly.
use the thing that already exists.
That's right.
There you go. Yeah.
Mhm.
Nice.
Um,
I did put our the raid target in our shared chat. So if that
Thank you. We've got
helps
here.
everybody to figure out who to raid, we're raiding CK Bubbles, who is
Perfect.
part of our Earth Day raid train. So that's super exciting.
Where is? Oh, is that in our
Wonderful.
Discord? Am I looking at the wrong?
Yes,
chat?
in the Discord chat.
Mhm.
And before I let my bot do all of my wrap up stuff, I'm going to turn off our shared chat. So I just want to say thank you to everybody. Thank you to all of the chatters that are fans of all of the wonderful streamers that are here with us. So thank you all for joining in and being a part of this conversation.
Thank you,
Yes,
everyone.
thank you.
Um,
Thank you,
Yeah.
Jamie, for leading us. Thank you, Vi, or is it Vi or V? What do you
Vi.
prefer? Vi, thank you, Vi,
Vi.
for the tech support. And C, thank you for hosting us. And thank you all for your contributions and your thoughts. This has been really awesome.
all right, I guess we'll go ahead and raid on to the next person on the raid train.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. And remember, hope is the opposite of despair.
Yay. Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.